Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. Nimrod is on his second week of the European tour. He'll be doing antinatalism street outreach in Heidelberg in Germany on 12th July. He will then be going to Darmstadt on 13th July, Tübingen on 14th, Munich on 15th, and then Augsburg on 16th. And then ends the week in Leipzig on 17th and 18th of July. So if you happen to be in those cities, please get in touch with him. Link will be in the description. Mati Hairi and Amanda Suknik have been writing on antinatalism faster than I can read. They have a new paper, If Viruses Are Not Life Forms, Should Abortion Always Be Permitted? In that, they argue that if biology excludes viruses from being alive because they cannot sustain themselves independently, then the same biological standard should also exclude fetuses during early and mid pregnancy. Their claim here is not that abortion is justified because bodily autonomy overrides fetal rights. Instead, they attack the very premise that a fetus is biologically alive in the relevant sense. Abortion debates have often revolved around statements like abortion kills a human life. The authors argue this statement quietly assumes that a fetus is already an independent living organism. And then they ask, what exactly counts as life? If viruses, which contain DNA, they evolve and reproduce, are officially classified as non-living because they depend completely on a host, why isn't the same standard applied to fetuses? Modern biology usually excludes viruses from life, and that's because they have no metabolism, they cannot reproduce independently, they rely entirely on a host for both of those things, and they cannot regulate themselves. The authors argue that early fetuses are similar. In gestation, a fetus depends on the pregnant woman's body for oxygen, nutrients, waste removal, hormonal regulation, temperature regulation, and so on. Without this support, it cannot survive. And so, under the same biological criteria used for viruses, an early fetus also lacks the independent, self maintaining organization that is normally associated with life. That's an analogy. But in presenting that, the authors revisit Aristotle's idea that something becomes a true living being only once it possesses its own internal organizing principle, its own soul or form. They argue that even Aristotle did not think that a newly conceived embryo was automatically a complete individual. Historically, Aristotle believed ensoulment occurred weeks after conception. Ironically, modern conservatives often invoke Aristotle indirectly while rejecting one of his own conclusions that early abortion would not have counted as killing a fully formed human individual. The paper also criticizes Rosalind Hursthaus's influential virtue ethics approach. Rosalind Hursthaus is a moral philosopher who has argued that having children is generally one of the central worthwhile achievements of a woman's life. Mati and Amanda criticize this because it is based on outdated gender assumptions. It is not supported by evidence. It is also dismissive of women who choose different lives, and it is inconsistent with modern feminism. So the paper is not explicitly on antinatalism, but there are several ideas that resonate. Mainly, it rejects treating fetal life as biologically self-evident, and it questions whether reproduction deserves privileged moral status. The authors are careful to say that this is only a conceptual argument. They acknowledge that people may still value fetuses for other reasons like emotional or moral or symbolic reasons, etc. The focus of this paper is much narrower. It is on whether the fetus actually is a biological life form in the sense commonly assumed. After publication of this article, philosopher Péter Kakuk criticized the paper, arguing that the virus analogy was too broad and that dependency alone cannot determine whether something is alive. Hairi and Suknik responded in a short follow-up article. They explained that they were targeting only one specific anti-abortion argument. Their claim is simply that if someone uses the biological classification of life as the decisive objection to abortion, then they should apply that definition consistently. Kakuk argued that if dependency is what determines whether someone is a living being or not, then there are many other people who are dependent on others. For example, newborn babies, severely disabled people, coma patients, patients on life support, and so on. Mati and Amanda respond by saying that these cases are not comparable because those individuals already possess their own autonomous biological organization. External care merely helps maintain those functions that are already their own. By contrast, they argue that a fetus depends directly on the pregnant person's metabolism in a way that more closely resembles the dependency used to classify viruses as non living. Kakuk also pointed out that viruses are excluded from life not only because they are dependent, but also because they are acellular, meaning they don't have functioning cells. They lack independent metabolism, they lack homeostasis, meaning they don't have capacity to regulate their own bodies with respect to the environment. One example of this is body temperature. Our bodies maintain a certain body temperature even when surroundings may be cooler or hotter. Viruses lack any such capability and they never develop into autonomous organisms, meaning there is no potential for them to become an independent being later on. Mati and Amanda accept that these distinctions exist, but argue that for the specific philosophical argument they are addressing, the relevant comparison concerns whether something constitutes another living organism inside someone else's body, rather than whether its individual cells are biologically active. This response actually strengthens the philosophical credibility of the paper. Rather than insisting they have disproved all objections to abortion, Amanda and Mati clarify that they have identified an inconsistency in one specific anti abortion argument. The assumption that simply calling a fetus a human life settles the abortion debate is not accurate. A new paper titled From Compassion to Coercion: Inversion of Antinatalism in the Offset by Sanzu Ozge Osman examines the 2021 dystopian novel The Offset. Sanzu is also the translator of David Benatar's Better Never to Have Been in Turkish. In this paper, she argues that The Offset fundamentally misrepresents antinatalism by turning a philosophy based on compassion into an authoritarian ideology built on coercion and violence. Rather than criticizing philosophical antinatalism itself, the novel depicts a distorted version that resembles state terror far more than David Benatar's ethical position. The novel is set in a future devastated by climate collapse. To compensate for the environmental cost of being born, every 18-year-old must choose one of their parents to be publicly executed. The government calls this the offset, a carbon payment made in human lives. Birth is treated as a crime. The state repeatedly declares that for every birth there should be a death. Public executions become ritualized rather than criminal punishment. Sanzu argues that this is not philosophical antinatalism. Real antinatalism is concerned about suffering to which potential people could be exposed if they are realized. It is about preventing suffering and it rejects coercion and violence. It is not for killing already existing people. Fictional world in the novel The Offset instead says that reproduction deserves punishment, parents deserve execution, children become instruments of state violence, and the society at large celebrates sacrifices. The protagonist of this novel is Miri. She feels guilty simply for existing. She believes her birth has made her responsible for environmental destruction and must decide which parent dies. The paper notes that this guilt echoes one genuine antinatalist insight. Parents create children without considering the interests of those future children. However, the novel immediately pushes that insight into a horrific political system that forces children to become executioners of their own parents. The novel links ecological collapse with population controls. The paper argues that the government solution is fundamentally misguided. Instead of addressing the industry, political systems, economic structures, etc., the regime makes ordinary families bear the burden. Environmental destruction becomes personalized. The state convinces everyone that killing parents somehow balances the Earth's carbon budget. So, even though it presents procreation as a punishable act, it is not really about antinatalism. The offset is better understood as a warning about how any moral philosophy can be weaponized by authoritarian governments. A new academic paper, Antinatalism and Motherhood from the Perspective of the Social Psychology of Religion by Tuba Donmez Kagler, was published in the Turkish Journal for the Psychology of Religion in June 2026. It looks at how antinatalist ideas are clashing with religious motherhood norms in Turkey. The paper paper was originally published in Turkish and I had it translated into English. This study looks at antinatalism through a Turkish Islamic majority lens. The author, an MA student, pulled her data from Turkish antinatalist Instagram pages with anonymized user comments, plus the usual sources like Bennett's asymmetry argument, Masahiro Morioka's categories of antinatalism, and so on, and set them against Quranic verses, Hadith, and Torah and Bible passages that explicitly command believers to be fruitful and multiply. This is a society where having kids is treated as a religious duty and motherhood is sanctified. But in that same society, some people lean toward antinatalism or choose voluntary childlessness. They are not just making a lifestyle choice, they are triggering a real cognitive dissonance between their beliefs and their faith. That shows up as guilt, fear of social exclusion, and pressure from family, especially for religious women. One thing to note is that this is a qualitative study, and so generalizing this may not be accurate. But this is a rare instance where antinatalism is intersecting with Islamic culture specifically, and so this is quite interesting. Those were some of the stories for this week, and I know this was a little short. I have missed a lot of things because, again, I blame it on water shortage. But thanks for watching and see you next time.